Hello folks, it's Duncan with Free as an Eagle, and I'm just jumping back on this to give a little bit of 5-minute talk about the flooring of the deck. We did the framing yesterday, we did the flooring this morning, and it came out very well for a variety of reasons, partially luck, partially that we know what we're doing to a point. I'm going to switch it over to regular camera so you will now not see me and you'll see what we did. I'll give a quick tutorial on some of the little tips and tricks that we use. So yesterday we had framed the deck and gotten it together. And today, this is a much easier thing to do is lay the flooring down, but we did get lucky. We had ordered material from a lumber yard and they actually gave us some pretty good wood. And one of the things we did sort of accidentally, when you do layout across a frame, there's several ways of doing it, and a lot of times I'm tempted to measure from the center out, which on this seemed like a good idea possibly, but then in the end I thought, well, normally you pull layout from one end. I've got an old beat up tape here. I forgot to bring a good one up with me. I just came up to do this little video even though it's kind of drizzly today. But a couple of things are interesting. If you lay a tape out and you're doing sheet goods like plywood, you want to hold your tape at 3/4 beyond what you're doing, and there's a reason for that. When you lay plywood down, you want the end of a piece of plywood to land on a joist, and we use 16 on center as a standard. So if you start the layout at 15 1/4 on the inside, when you get over to the 4-foot mark, you'll be in the middle of a joist, and it's just the way it works. When I ordered this material for the floor, this is exactly 18 feet long and 8 feet front to back. So there's efficient ways to order material. This floor deck, interestingly, ended up with absolutely no waste except for the sawdust on cutting some sheets in half, for the simple reason that the deck is 24 by 36. So that's an even multiple of 4 feet in both directions. So you end up with no waste at all, which is kind of good. I have a tendency to try to be efficient for cost and material reasons, so you won't generate a lot of junk you've got to get rid of. And the same thing applies with the deck flooring. Now, normally I would have tried to have a 1-inch overhang all around the deck with the flooring, but because I framed it exactly 8 by 18, I would have had to buy 20 feet lengths or something that would add up to 20 feet in order to have that overhang, and then I would be throwing away a lot of it. So I thought, well, there's ways around this, and I didn't think about making the frame a little smaller to accommodate that. And I thought, well, you know what, if we just end it right even with this last joist, we can rip down another piece of flooring, take an inch off, and just run a little band across the ends, which sometimes is done deliberately, but I figured that's better than wasting a bunch of wood. So anyway, we used that mentality, and we also pulled off the end for the layout rather than going on the center, or we would have run into a problem because these lengths, we got 12s, 10s, and 8s, and 10 and 8 add up to 18, and a 12 and a 6 add up to 18, and we can cut some 12s in half to get the 6s. So the thought was, when you're doing the floor, I couldn't get 18-foot pieces all in one length, so we decided to mix it up with these 3 sizes, and you end up with an even pattern. You go back and forth with the breaks, and you can on a deck just have them break randomly on joists, and if you scatter the breaks around, it's like doing an oak floor in a house. You wind up with, breaks, but they're all randomized. On this pattern, we decided to just make it totally even and consistent. So that was our goal. And using the 12-6 and the 10-8, we could do this with minimal waste. And so that was a good way to think. And since we pulled off one end, this is an old beat tape, as I said, but I'm using it for illustration reasons. I cleaned my car out earlier, and I didn't put a tape back, so I salvaged this one out of a trash bag. It had failed because it wouldn't rewind all the way, and it was quite shot and rusty, but it's good enough for this illustration. So here's an interesting principle. You pull off the end, you come in the 16 inches, and you're on a joist, and that will keep happening. Any multiple of 16 inches will land on a break. And when you're buying lumber, if you buy, say, 10-footers, that would not be a multiple of 16, so it wouldn't work. But what I found, and I'll share this with you, it's a kind of a neat little trick. I'm just going to hold that tape down. If you look at a tape, so you go into the foot mark, then you go in, every red mark on a tape is deliberately got a little red number on it that makes it visible. So when you're doing layout, you hook the tape over something, and very often if I'm using sheet goods, one of the tricks that you use is you start measuring in 15 1/4. If you're going to do something like plywood, make your first mark and then go 1.5 inches over, and you're in the middle of a joist, and you keep repeating that process. So typically you would hold the tape 3/4 off the end, make a mark on the 16, and what I tend to do is I'll make one mark there, but I'll take a small nail and I'll nail it in right there, and then I can just hook the tape over that nail, and I'll be on layout 16 inches all the rest of the way across, and not have to remember to go 3/4. Like if I start this at 15 3/4, then I got to go 32 3/4. That's a nuisance, so I just go in the 15 3/4, hook a nail, and keep on going from there. So here's the thing with the tape, it actually can help you plan. If you look at the tape, so you come out and you want to use material that's not wasteful. If I come out here, these red marks, 16, 32, I get all the way out to 48, and guess what? 48 inches and is also a multiple of 16. So 3/16 are 48, but it's also 4 feet. And if I double that, then 8 feet will land on a break. Any multiple of 4 feet will land on a break. So that is kind of how I calculated what wood to use. And it was kind of accidental. I didn't actually plan this out as well as it might seem. I just ordered wood I knew would add up to 18 feet, and it happened to be the multiples of 4 feet. So this resulted in virtually no waste. I did have this issue with the overhang, but I'm overcoming that by doing a band. And I'm going to walk over here. So we start on the outside when you're laying out deck flooring. And the reason is when you get in toward the house, you can kind of make up for little details. Like if it's uneven, you can rip a board down and make it smaller, but you don't want it to look stupid out here. And this is what really matters. The very front of the deck wants to look pretty, and you want to have an even overhang. So what I did is I measured out for 1 inch, and then I went back. Now this wood is roughly 5.5 wide, and I measured back 4.5 from the framing and snapped a line across to create an absolutely straight line. So even if the band on the deck's a little funky, we don't want to carry that through the flooring. So we snap a line, and we align the first board right on that line, and then we nail that one down securely so it won't move when we're nailing the others, because pressure treated wood's a little squirrely sometimes, and you end up having to pull on it a bit to line it up. Now here's the other thing with pressure treated wood. When you're using some of these newfangled Trex kind of materials, they're nice, they're durable, they look pretty, but this is a rustic cabin, and I actually like the look of wood, and I don't really mind the way pressure treated wood looks when it dries out. So my trick with to make it look pretty, after about a year or so, the chemicals in this pressure treated wood will dry enough so it'll take stain. But the trick is never use paint type products on a horizontal surface like a floor, because if you do, water will get under them and eventually they'll peel off, and then you have to redo it and power wash it, and that'll look like crap. I've seen that happen too many times. So my trick is wait about a year and then go over it, clean it a little if you have to, set the nails if they're sticking up anywhere. And what's going to happen is the wood is going to dry, and then you can get an oil-based translucent stain, a transparent or translucent stain with that won't leave a film. It'll just soak in, give some color to the wood, kind of dress it up, but it never will peel off because it soaks in. It's not a surface product like, say, latex paint, which would fail and peel off. So I don't mind the look of pressure treated, and it's easier. I just nailed it down with a nail gun. I'm not getting fancy. Again, rustic cabin. I don't want it to get so fancy that I've got to use Kingston railing systems and all these expensive products. I want it to be kind of a woodsy little cabin. So anyway, so we get the flooring started. I'm going to walk around here and go to the other end to demonstrate something. So with the way this laid out, it's a sloping surface here, and I'm wearing flip-flops, so that's not terrific. And it's been a little wet. Okay, so we come down to this end, and what you'll see looking at the ground here, so here you see pieces on the ground. That is all the waste from this flooring project. The only exception is that little piece. and it's because the last board I put down was longer than I needed, but I'd run out of the perfect size for what I was doing. So anyway, efficiency-wise, it worked out good. And then what you do, we started all the boards on that end so they would line up and come across, and I wouldn't have to do any cutting on that end. And then these all ran pressure treated. When you buy it, always runs a little bit long. They give you an extra ½ inch or an extra inch. So the pieces down here were all sticking out, you know, up to an inch, but some of them were shorter, so I couldn't really use them. So what we simply did is snap the line in the end, even with the joist, and we cut these back to create a fairly straight line. And that way we'll wrap the band down here too. The front's happy the way it is. And we were actually extremely lucky on one other way, and this was just dumb luck. It wasn't skill or any other factor, but I've never had this happen where we just snapped the line and we started putting boards down, pulling them tight. And another thing about pressure treated I wanted to mention, this wood came in quite wet, and typically it's supposed to be 5.5 wide, but most of these are 5 3/4, give or take. There were a few dry ones in there that were a little narrower, but pressure treated is a product that's soaked with chemicals so it won't rot, but it swells the wood. And unlike Trex or other products where you literally have to space the boards about 1/8 of an inch apart, and when we're doing that kind of a deck with the synthetics that won't shrink, we'll put 8-penny nails in between each course, so when we push the boards over, we have that water drain gap. But with pressure treated, in the past we would space it, and then a year later it would shrink down to the point where you had these 1/4 inch or bigger gaps that became a hazard. So what you do with pressure treated is we jammed this tight, pulled it right as tight as it would go. You see a few little spots of space. You can't always pull them completely tight, but the nice thing is those spaces will all open up to the point where there's going to be space between all these boards, about 1/8 of an inch. And you want that because water gets on this and you want it to be able to drain off. And you know, that's good. Another little trick too is you don't really see it with these boards. They're pretty good and it's a pretty subtle thing, but if you have boards doing what they call cupping, so that they have a bowl effect curving upward, like say this, say you have, try to use my hands as an illustration, the board is curved this way, it'll hold water. So when the board looks good on both sides, or the curved down side illustration like this, if they're curving down like that, they'll drain. They won't hold water. So you want to kind of look at them, and if they have a crown, you can take a speed square and just hold it against the board, and you'll see if there's a little bit of air under the ends or whether it's in the middle. If it's on the ends and you can rock the speed square, that's an indication that you've got it in a way that will drain well. So little tricks like that are not a bad thing. So about the wood itself, so we nail these boards down, we're nice and tight, we know we'll have space later, and again there's little spaces here, but you know what, when the spaces get bigger you won't notice these tiny variations. So it isn't worth getting nervous about a 1/16 of an inch, because when it's a 1/4 of an inch, you're not going to notice. So here we go over to the inside. Now what's very interesting is normally when you get to the house side, you always start from the outside in. When you're adding anything to an existing building, start with the outside in. You can make that perfect square, everything else. Never build off the house, because in most cases with an older house or even a fairly new one, starting off the house, it may be uneven, you may have an angle, you may have funny things going on with it. It may be bowed in or out, but you can make the new work perfect. So you go out there and you snap a line and you make it perfect. Now you run it toward the house. Now a usual thing that can happen is as you approach the house, normally you're going to get to a point where the last piece has to be ripped down. What you want to do is measure when you get about 3 boards or 4 boards out to see how much distance you have left and what you're going to run into when you approach the house. You don't want to have a tiny sliver 3/4 of an inch wide. So sometimes the best trick is if you're going to have just a tiny little thing that's 1 inch wide, go back about 3 or 4 boards and take your table saw and mill off 1 inch or 3/4 of an inch off the last couple of courses, and you can graduate it down to the point where you get in here and then you have, say, 3 or 4 inches. It's substantial enough so you can nail it. Doesn't look ridiculous. So those are all, useful little tricks. However, we are extremely lucky on this one. When we got all the way in against the house, guess what? The last board just fit perfectly without being milled. And if there's a little bit of space in there, I really don't care, because this is an unusual thing where normally you're adding a deck to an existing house. We haven't built the house yet, but we had some time to all the materials just came today actually, so we have piles of wood for the main build. But we had time, and before the materials came, we decided to build the deck, and then we actually are going to set staging on the deck, so it'll help us when we're building the main house. We're going to be using some very heavy material, 28-foot Doug fir rafters, and we're going to need to be able to lean them up and use staging. We're going to have 3 levels of staging, so we'll be 20 feet in the air, and we'll have a nice place to stand because the ridge is going to be 26 feet off this floor deck. So we're going to be very safety conscious, working with heavy material at a pretty good height. So this deck will allow a nice set of staging to be put on it and worked off from. So anyway, this was just dumb luck that we didn't even have to rip these boards down. And then eventually siding, like there was a little bit of a bow going on with the house band there, so that the gap opens up a little bit. But you know what the deal is? The walls are going to go across this. There'll be a French door, I think, out here. And then what's going to happen is eventually I'm planning to put log siding on the gable ends. So that log siding will come down and it'll come out over this a little bit and cover up that break. And what we'll do is, before we put that down, we have flashing that you can see that we installed. Yeah, okay, I got it pretty well amplified here. So this plastic flashing, I think I mentioned in the last video, is a thing that you attach, and now water will be guided away from this band, be guided away from the wood here and down away, and then I'm actually going to flash this foam eventually so it'll be less vulnerable. But so the house siding will come down. We'll put another level of flashing in here to guide water off the siding and then onto this wood. So I really want to keep water infiltration out, because water is not your friend when it's in the wrong places. And if it gets in between the wood and your house, it's very damaging. So sills of doors, sills of windows, places where siding comes down and joins a deck are very vulnerable areas where failure can occur, and it won't show up right away. You get water in there, and 10 years later you got ants pouring out of things and crawling around your house, and you're wondering why. So my aim with this house, because the one I'm in now I've run into some of these issues, is to try to prevent them as much as possible. So anyway, this is a little tutorial about how to put a floor on a deck. I mean, the typical way, you can frame in such a way that you have enough to have your inch overhang right on here. I didn't think that far ahead. I just wanted to frame the deck 8 by 18. So the flooring 8 by 18, I'm just going to add a little strip, take a piece of wood and then mill off an inch and a half or an inch off one board on both sides, and that way I'll get 2 strips that I can use to dress up the ends. And I'll have a nice little deck, and eventually, of course, you don't really see much of what's out here because there's going to be eventually railings going out and around the perimeter of the deck. So all this detail on the outer edges is going to be obscured by those railings. So that's why I don't get super nervous about those details, because you're going to be doing something that will actually help mask that. And as you can see, this was the simple details of this, and I did actually get hold of a bunch of hurricane ties and other metal, which I'm going to use to link. That post is pretty well tied down to that base. These nails will hold this, but if a hurricane decided to tear up this thing, I'm going to put metal hurricane ties, little straps between these other components, and that'll beef it up a little more. Let's see what else we got going on. So now we are ready. This is a Friday. We've got material here. We just got 2 units of plywood. We got lumber there, and that was some leftover I overordered for the floor. So that'll probably be for some stairs that will eventually be attached. And then this is covered up because it's rainy right now, but now we have this entire huge package of 28-foot rafters, and we have another of various lengths of wood for the wall wood and bracing and such. So we're good to go for Monday. We're gonna get going with a big framing, which will be really fun. And as you can see, staining this floor deck actually did work out quite well, because now there's a bunch of standing water on here that's not penetrating anything. So that wood's protected enough so during the build, the weather won't be bubbling up the plywood or doing other damage. Anyway, so that catches us up to the present moment. And Monday we will jump on the main build of the A, which will really be fun to see. So I hope you enjoyed the little show here, and we'll be back in a few days. Take it easy.